Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Oliver Jacobs, and I'm a senior history and political science double major. Being a student at a liberal arts college, I'm often asked what the purpose and benefit of a liberal arts education is, as opposed to more technical degrees, such as engineering or accounting. I believe that the accomplishments of our speaker today truly demonstrate the benefits and opportunities of a Carleton liberal arts education once we enter the professional world. Alexandra Barba has worn many hats throughout her career, starting out by working for former Congressman Mark Udall, and then as a field organizer for Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign in Colorado. She has also worked as an energy practice group manager for the law firm Skadden Arps and in various roles for former Vice President Al Gore's nonprofit, Climate Reality. She holds a Master's of Public Policy and Affairs from Brown University and a bachelor's degree in political science from Carleton College. More recently, she has served as the Chief of Staff to the Colorado COVID-19 Incident Commander and as the Senior Advisor to the Executive of the Director of the Colorado Department of Public Health. Currently, she serves as the Chief of Staff for the Division of Disease Control and Public Health Response at the Colorado State Department of Public Health and Environment, where she is tasked with preventing and mitigating the impacts of public health and natural disasters. Today, she has joined us to talk about how a liberal arts generalist becomes a chief of staff in a global emergency. Please join me in welcoming class of 2009's Alexandra Barba back to Carleton College.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thank you so much for having me. It is great to be back at Carleton. I'd like to start off with the immortal words of Robert Lopez and Jeff Marks. What do you do with a BA in English? What is my life going to be? 4 years of college and plenty of knowledge have earned me this useless degree. Just kidding, Carleton, sorry. I can't pay the bills yet, 'cause I have no skills yet. The world is a big, scary place. But somehow I can't shake the feeling I might make a difference to the human race. Okay. Sorry, I was a Nightingale and an Exit 69er. We can't help ourselves. Couldn't resist. Robert Lopez and Jeff Marks wrote the music and lyrics for the musical Avenue Q. It won Best Musical, Book, and Score at the 2004 Tony Awards, and consequently entered the collective consciousness of college students everywhere, just as I was expected to declare my major, which I had always planned to be English. When I was sitting where you are, I was pretty concerned. I had a lot of anxiety about the future. I was having a great time learning, but especially as I became a junior and then a senior, I didn't know what this whole career thing was really supposed to look like. I was pretty sure I was supposed to be thinking about it. But my whole life I'd had some sort of plan. You're Carls, this is likely true of most of you, so maybe this sounds familiar. I worked hard in middle school, so I'd be prepared, preferably ahead of the game, actually, by the time I got to high school, so that I could kick the other kids' butts in the hardest high school classes, so I could get into a top college, so I could, succeed at life. Your generation is much more savvy about this than I was. We elder millennials graduated into the Great Recession. Suddenly, it didn't super matter whether you had a college degree or where it was from. There were very few good jobs to be had. Many of us moved home or jumped straight into grad school, even though we weren't exactly sure it was the specialty we wanted to pursue for the rest of our lives. It was my senior year before I ever heard of the Carleton Career Center, although luckily, Carleton, being Carleton, was seeing the signs and more aggressively programming and making support available in that area very quickly. But now the secret is fully out. Having a college degree does not guarantee you career success and riches. We all know this, and there are countless articles, Instagram accounts, LinkedIn thought leaders and TikTokers out there giving us all kinds of advice on how to get ahead in today's job market. The problem is, so often it is so general, so broad, and yet somehow it's still hard to feel like it pertains to your situation. So I have come humbly offering some career advice to you, Carleton, advice that I hope will be more specifically relevant to you. I spent the past 2+ years as the Chief of Staff to the COVID-19 Incident Commander for the state of Colorado. I run weekly meetings with Governor Polis and his Chief of Staff. I've spoken for our state to the White House. I've written policy for the citizens of our state and set the agenda for the COVID response. I have no specific set of technical skills. In fact, I have little to no specified knowledge that you aren't getting here already. What I have is the ability to look at things from different points of view, to talk to the subject matter experts and follow them down a rabbit hole, then step back and see the big picture, to not lose the forest for the trees. I have the ability to connect the dots, to think critically and creatively to solve problems. These are all skills you're all developing here at Carleton. I was interested in English because I was interested in everything. To choose other majors seemed like limiting myself, going down just one specific path and eliminating others. This is why I chose liberal arts. I was interested in people, in politics, in what was going on and the interconnectedness of everything. It seemed like authors of great literature were the ones who explored that in a way that I found entertaining, so that was the original plan. Of course, this was also at a time when everyone was telling the somewhat more aimless college students, the ones of us who said, I don't know what I want to do for work. I like to read and write. And everyone told us, you should go to law school. No idea. So my first big piece of advice, do what you're drawn to. Yes, listen to your mentors. We'll get to that later on. But when it comes down to making choices about your next steps and how to spend your time, listen only to yourself. And when an opportunity arises, even if you don't feel ready for it, just say yes. Choice paralysis and overwhelm are so real. There are so many futures for you all. I remember my senior year at Carleton calling my parents and telling them that I was never going to forgive them for telling me always that I could be anything that I wanted to be. But don't worry. Not to get too pop psychology on you here, but the choices you make will be right because they will be what you choose. And you're Carl's. You'll never be done. There is always going to be more to do. So embrace constant change, and when something comes along that sounds interesting to you, say yes. And that includes saying yes to things you think you're not qualified for. This is especially for the women here. And then you figure it out as you go. I 99% guarantee you that you'll be better at it than most people. There's almost nothing that you truly can't do. I mean, I don't know, maybe don't volunteer to do surgery, but. When I was a freshman here, I took an intro class with Stephen Shear and learned that he led an off-campus studies program in Washington, D.C. It was going the next year, and it was only every 3 years. I did not feel ready as a freshman to start signing up willy-nilly for off-campus studies trips. Hell, I'd never even been to the LDC. I'd stuck to Burton because it was what I knew. I know, I was missing out. The application was daunting, as I recall, and freshmen hardly ever applied, but I gave it a shot anyway. The worst they could say was no, and I could always decide not to go. But when I got accepted, there was no way I was not going. In DC, I interned for my congressman from Colorado and thereby gained what they consider the gold standard in the career world of policy and politics, the Hill experience. It didn't matter that I was just clipping news articles for the daily roundup and drafting form letters to constituents from the congressman's stamped signature. What matters was I was there. That same congressman ran for US Senate in 2008. I was home for the summer and called them up and said, hey, I entered for Congressman Udall in DC. Is there anything I can do to help with the campaign this summer? Figuring that they'd offer me some sort of volunteer opportunity. Instead, they looked at my Hill experience resume and said, actually, yeah, can you go be our campaign organizer for the federal campaign on the Western Slope? That's a very different part of my state. It's 5 hours from my family home in Boulder, and I had no money, but I said yes, having absolutely no idea what I was agreeing to, figuring I would work it out somehow. Then they sent me a W-4 form, and I realized they were serious, and this was an actual job or something, so I called them up and said, okay, sorry, what am I doing again? They clarified that this was, in fact, a paid staff job with the campaign. I'd be working for all federal candidates, including for Congress, Senate, and President, and the job ended when the campaign ended in November. I thought about it for about 3 hours, and then I called up Carleton and said, hey, sorry, I won't be there in the fall. Is that okay? I don't know about how it is now, but taking time off of Carleton is something that just was not done at the time. But I had to say yes to this opportunity. I ended up running the Democratic campaign in 3 counties in rural Colorado when I was 21. I got to meet Barack Obama. I had staff and interns. I was making decisions about campaign strategy that I had no business making, but I applied myself. I learned the people. I just kept saying yes. If people living in a remote area of the rural county asked if I could get out to do voter canvassing there, I said yes and then figured out how to do it. If the people I tried to recruit for door knocking or phone calling said, I'm too nervous talking to people, but can I help in another way? I said yes and came up with things for them to do. Often it was bringing me food. By the time November rolled around, I had over 200 people working for me on a regular basis for free. We brought together neighbors who hadn't known that they were on the same political page. There was a tangible energy at the headquarters, which was also where I literally lived. We increased the party's voter turnout by an average of 30% in those counties. Now, okay, how much of that was the mystical power of our candidate and how much was our work? I can't really account for officially, but we certainly built a great, energized community of Democrats in a very red area. A couple other yeses from when I was at Carleton. Study abroad, especially if you want to work in policy. In addition to my off-campus study in DC, I studied Spanish in Madrid, political economy in Beijing with the great Roy Groh. Yes, it's sad to be away from your friends, and you might miss something awesome one year, like Rottbladder Spring Concert. But there will likely never be a time in your life when it's easier, logistically or financially, to spend that much time in another country. Whether or not there is a lot of book learning happening on those trips, and whatever the concentration of study, it will absolutely expand your mind, your understanding of the world, and your confidence. Just simply observing how other cultures live, what they value, and how they interact builds you into a more resilient, curious, and observant person. In this increasingly global society, actually being there will give you a whole lot more information than others who are only absorbing other cultures through social media. When I graduated, as I said, there were not a lot of jobs available, and we Carls were all scrambling to find what had been promised, what we had been told we needed to pursue, something that would set us on a career path, something that would positively contribute to the world, and necessarily something that would allow us to pay the bills, including our student loans. Luckily, I had connected with a fantastic Carleton alum named Don Frost through the Career Center my senior year, and I just kept hounding him with emails in a very polite way, of course, and strategically timed about 3 to 5 weeks apart. He suggested that I come out to DC and meet with the HR department at the law firm where he was a partner, Skadden Arps, to get on their list of possible legal assistant candidates. Now, because I was one of those students who was interested in everything, and particularly in the political world, I felt like my main skills were reading and writing. I was, of course, planning to probably eventually go to law school. So I felt like being a legal assistant in DC was a good idea. Worth mentioning that I hadn't done my research in this instance at all. I didn't know that Skadden Arps was a top international law firm, in fact, one of the highest grossing in the world at the time, and had basically invented the hostile takeover. Being a legal assistant at a law firm in DC is a good idea, was the extent of what was on my mind when I said yes again, completely unprepared, and packed a bag and spent $300 of my last $800 to get to DC. Luckily, there were Carls there whom I could stay with, but I just went with no set plan. I met with Skadden HR, and they told me, yeah, it's 2009. We're actually laying off most of our legal assistants right now, but we'll get back to you. I stayed in DC for a couple months, taking temp jobs, which, by the way, included one that listed requiring deep knowledge of Excel, which I absolutely did not have. But guess what? Google is a thing, and it all went fine. I'm politely bugging Skadden HR every 3 weeks. Eventually, they got back to me and said, we don't have any legal assistant jobs, but we do have an energy practice specialist position. Can you come in and interview with our energy partners? I had no idea what that position title meant. Nothing comes up when you try to Google that job in the industry. But luckily, I could call Dawn Frost and ask, is this them trying to give me a non-legal job? Am I going to be a glorified secretary? Now, I want to take a pause here, and I want to talk about being a glorified secretary, because it's likely that upon leaving Carleton, no matter what specialty you're going into, you will likely be doing work that could be termed as glorified secretary work. Tracking, paperwork, doing research, sending reminder emails, maybe planning dinners or conferences or meetings or parties. Do it, and do it really well. It will take you places. Dawn Frost could have, maybe should have, told me that being a legal assistant is being a glorified secretary. Or maybe he should have said, are you casting aspersions on our secretaries? Because they're some of the most knowledgeable and best people in our law firm. But what he said was, I think this is an opportunity to get your foot in the door. And you'll be working with one of our most powerful partners, Marty Klepper. Needless to say, I said yes. And that job, as it turned out, didn't have a great description or clear goals, because it was totally what you make it. Things weren't running as smoothly as they could have in the energy practice. That's about all I gathered from the interview process. Once hired, I had to go person to person and figure out what wasn't going well, and then figure out what I could do about it. The partners didn't all have super clear lines of sight into what their associates were doing or how much time they had available. The database of historical cases that they brought to pitch meetings with new clients was old and disorganized. There was a lot happening in renewable energy at the time, and this practice had historically been used to working with oil and gas clients. These are just a few of the things I unearthed and fixed for them, and the notorious Marty Klepper, who most other partners were afraid of, ended up as one of my strongest advocates, gave me promotions and raises that made me ever more marketable, and eventually wrote me a glowing recommendation for grad school. In my opinion, these are the best kinds of jobs. Say yes to jobs that are newly created, even though it may be a risk. Say yes to jobs that have vague descriptions, where the hiring managers are not quite sure what they need, and then figure it out. You'll be a hero. This, by the way, goes almost directly against the advice given by so many career articles out there. But I also say work for difficult people, especially early in your career. I'm telling you, if everyone says, ooh, he or she is scary, work for them. If you can make them like and appreciate you, you will know that you can be successful in almost any environment. Also, bosses that other people find scary can help you get shit done. All I'd have to do at Skadden was say, Marty Klepper wants this, and I'd get service immediately. While working at Skadden with no technical background or education in energy or law, much less energy law, I got to be part of what at the time was 2 of the largest solar projects in the US. That's what working for and making yourself useful to difficult, powerful people will do for you. Now we take a bit of a turn, and I'm going to give you a quick bit on passions and following your heart. Because after working at a huge corporate law firm for a couple years, as rewarding as it was, I was thinking, you know, being a lawyer isn't really what I want to do. There's not actually that much reading or writing involved, and I miss stories about humans. My father is a writer. He's mostly famous for being the most prolific author of video game strategy guides. Yes, he's got to play everything first, from Myst to Grand Theft Auto 5 to God of War, but his first love is fiction, and it was mine as well. Think about the books you read when you were 10 to 18. How much did those shape you? For me, everything from Jane Austen to Beverly Cleary to Judy Blume to Anne Shears had a profound effect on how I thought, and I believe, who I became as a person. So I always had this almost secret desire to become a young adult fiction book editor. Once again, it started with making connections. I talked to one of my dad's YA fiction editors. She set me up with tons of informational interviews, which I took, only to learn that the recession was still affecting everything, and especially publishing. There were no editorial assistant jobs at that moment. Then I talked to an entertainment lawyer at Skadden, who advised that I not move to New York without a plan. But, he said, have you considered working on scripts? It's still working on story, but it's easier and cheaper to live in LA, and there are a lot more opportunities. So I moved to LA. I went to a lot of industry parties and talked to a lot of people about what they did, and eventually I ended up as a junior script doctor for a company that managed screenwriters' careers. Eventually, one of the many contacts I'd made via informational interviews in New York called me up and asked if, given my experience in Hollywood, I'd been there like less than a year, I would be interested in coming to New York to be a literary scout. Long story short, I ended up in the heart of New York publishing with the job of reading YA manuscripts that were on submission to publishers to see if they'd make good movies or TV shows. I was on the hunt for the next Twilight, the next Hunger Games. Fun fact, I don't know if any of you have read or seen To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han, but I got to read it when it was a mere manuscript hoping to be published. I told all of my film and TV clients, you should buy the rights to this and make it a movie immediately, and no one listened. Luckily, Netflix is a thing, and they made it, and it was the most watched Netflix movie for a while, so I felt vindicated. But I had some fun, and I had yet again, through just hard work, saying yes, and talking to people, gotten to a place that I'd wanted to go. And yet it wasn't quite feeling right. First off, side note, when I said work for difficult people, what I did not mean is toxic people. And there is a difference. There's a boss who is hard on people, who is exacting, who is unforgiving, who is tough to please because she's got high standards and doesn't have time to make you feel good when you screwed up, right? Those people are worth working for. It raises your standards, it pushes you to be the best you can be, it challenges you, which is something you will be constantly seeking once you leave Carleton. But there are also bosses who actually foster a toxic environment, who call people out just for the sake of publicly exercising their power. There are workplaces where no one trusts their coworkers because everyone's always ready to throw each other under the bus. If you put in an honest effort to make it in that environment and change it for the better, and it's just not working, leave. You have my full blessing there to say no. There was a bit of that going on in this workplace. But mostly, I felt the pull back to the world of policy and politics. Obama's second term was almost halfway over, and I was feeling the need to get back in the game. I'd put in the time and effort to follow a dream that I'd always had, and now I could move on from it without regrets and continue forward in my career. A quote often attributed to Henry David Thoreau, though I believe he only wrote the first half, is, "Most men lead lives of quiet desperation and die with their song still inside them." I implore you, do not let this happen. If you have a song inside you, do what you can to make it happen. Say yes to that. Maybe you will find your forever career, or maybe you'll learn that it's not actually the song for you. I learned that I was not meant to be a New York publishing or film and TV gal, but all my experience did add up to a great side gig. Today, I professionally edit YA novels in my spare time. I speak at writers' conferences. I critique pages for budding authors, and it fills that part of my heart. I get to keep one toe in the fiction world. As I was figuring out what to do next, I was also missing my family and my home state. I'm a Colorado girl, and I hadn't lived there since pre-Carleton. So once again, I worked my contacts. I reached out to a couple people with no expectations, just letting them know that I was interested in getting back into the world of policy and politics, and that I was most interested in being in Colorado. Once again, my ex-boss, Marty Klepper, came through and let me know that one of his former partners at Skadden was now CEO of Al Gore's nonprofit called the Climate Reality Project. They had an office in DC and an office in Boulder, Colorado. It was my experience at this nonprofit that finally led me to grad school. Now, there are two ends of the spectrum when people are honestly discussing reasons to go to grad school, and I agree with both of them. The cynical people will tell you that it's mostly a very expensive piece of paper and some letters after your name, but that, hey, it gets you ahead. Others will tell you that it sharpens your mind, that you make invaluable connections that will help you on your path, and some will even tell you that they learned a lot of substance. If you want to be in the world of policy, of politics, or even just strategy in general, whether it's for an organization, a business, or government, get a master's in public policy, affairs, or administration from a respected school after you get some years of experience under your belt, and make sure that that's the way that you want to go. I cannot emphasize this too strongly. Up to a certain point in my career, Carleton had gotten me everywhere, and I probably gained the most actual book knowledge while I was here, and the Carleton connections are still the connections I rely on the most. But going back to being a student again, as a more world-wizened adult, with knowledge of the working world and more certainty about what I wanted to do, was absolutely priceless. And of course, the letters after your name definitely don't hurt. Most leadership in any organization or business or government entity has postgraduate degrees. It often happens that smart, capable, hard workers are passed over for promotions past a certain point. And this, unfortunately, especially applies to women. You might find yourself continuing to be pushed into those glorified secretary roles. So ladies, go get those degrees. Again, after at least a few years of work. While in grad school, if you want to be a powerful person in policy and strategy, in setting the direction of an organization, make sure you do a couple things. First, if you're a liberal arts generalist who has spent a lot of time on words, the reading and the writing, apply yourself in those quantitative classes. You don't have to become a statistician, but understanding statistics and economics will be invaluable. I have more than once pulled some logic out when in the presence of a snooty quant guy who thinks no one understands what he's talking about. That's how you win arguments, the respect of your coworkers, and continue to show your value in the workplace. During COVID, there were certainly lots of misleading facts flying around, and even though I wasn't on the data team or the governor's policy team, I became a person they would run white papers by just to make sure we weren't putting anything out there that wasn't interpreted correctly or that was ripe for misinterpretation. I was certainly not the top stats and econ student in my grad school cohort, and I am not the most mathematically inclined thinker. But I worked my ass off in those classes and gained just enough understanding in a 6-week intensive course that I can catch those things. Remember, you know more than you think you do relative to the rest of the world. The second important thing to do while in grad school is use your resources. And by that, I mostly mean your teachers and the speakers they bring in for you. Ask people for their time. It's a precious resource, but one that people are almost always willing to give to students. Take advantage of that. Your professors want to be your mentors, but when they're standing at the front of a 50-person class, it's a pretty one-way street. Reach out and make individual connections. Do go to office hours with specific questions about the content of the class, but also ask your favorite professor if they'd like to have coffee or lunch at a time that's convenient for them. Profs at Carleton and the kind of quality grad schools that you will go to teach for a reason. They're not only interested in their own research, and you might be surprised how many are interested in having a one-on-one conversation with you. Now, you who are here clearly already know this because you're here, but when outside speakers and practitioners come to campus, go to their talks. Ask questions, follow up with them afterward. If they live in the area, ask if they'd be willing to have coffee sometime. Coffees, by the way, are a magical thing. It's not often someone says no when you ask, "Can I buy you coffee?" Ask them about their experiences, their career path. Continue to go to stuff like this. I could hire you one day. Don't underestimate the power of showing interest. Don't think you're one of the crowd and that this person won't want to talk to you, no matter who they are. While in grad school, I got the opportunity to learn from Tom Perez, who at the time was the chair of the Democratic National Committee. This is a man who had done it all, including being President Obama's Secretary of Labor. He was basically in charge of democracy. We were all intimidated by him. People were so anxious about taking up his time that he didn't have a full list of students at his office hours. I took advantage of this. I met with him outside of the class regularly. I learned a ton of practical knowledge from him, including a problem-solving paradigm that I use regularly in my current work, and will share with you if you DM me. Networking is the name of the game. When I decided after grad school that I wanted to work in government, I started by reaching out to anyone and everyone doing the work I was interested in. Offered to take them to coffee, requested an informational interview, connected in any way convenient to them. Before I accepted my first state position, I spent 7 months having 83 networking meetings, mostly in person. One of these meetings was coffee with the governor's deputy legislative director. She and I had a particularly spirited and enjoyable conversation, and she said, as many others had said before her, "Stay in touch, and I'll keep you in mind if anything opens up." Most people who say that don't end up following through with job leads, but she did. I applied for one of the jobs, and I had an interview with the governor's chief policy advisor. I was extremely excited about how the interview went, but I was not offered the job. I followed up with the chief policy advisor, because why not, saying I was incredibly grateful for the chance to be interviewed, and I would be interested to hear any feedback she had regarding my application and interview, fully expecting to hear nothing back. Much to my surprise, she invited me back to the office for a 30-minute meeting to debrief the interview and selection process. She explained that they had hired someone who had experience working with the current administration and legislature, which would be crucial for this particular job, but that she'd been impressed with me and offered to provide a reference to anyone that I interviewed with in the future. I got my first state position as a policy analyst not long after that, without either of those women's involvement at all. But fast forward to June 2020, and I received an email from the man who would become my boss, saying he was hiring for a new director position because he needed help with COVID, and that people in the governor's office had floated my name as a possible strong candidate. I would never even have known that this position existed if the people I'd networked with had not heard about it and thought of me. Okay, this brings me to COVID and my most recent yeses. As I said, I was happily working in a mid-level, stable job as a policy analyst for the Department of Public Health and Environment. This guy emails me out of the blue and asked if I'd be interested in applying and interviewing for a job directing the coordination of COVID outbreak response across the state. I, of course, said yes to the interview, because why not? Never thinking that I'd be given a director job yet. Also, I had absolutely no public health experience or emergency response experience. But we had a great conversation in which I talked about how I was interested in being of help in this crisis, and how I was particularly comfortable in situations where the role was undefined and the job description was just basically, oh God, help us. He offered me the job, and then I had to decide. It was risky. I was in a permanent government position at the time. Many people will tell you these are coveted positions because you're very protected and basically can't be fired. Like, even if you decide at some point you want to slack off, ostensibly you can just keep staying and making your same salary until you retire and collect your pension. With the ups and downs of the market these days, one can understand how that might seem desirable. The job I was being offered was a COVID position. It was term limited, meaning there was only funding for it for the next 12 to 24 months, and it could actually end at any time if the need for that position ran out. But I was going to be working on the current most urgent need. I was going to be working with the governor, the state epidemiologist, and our senators and congresspeople and county commissioners and emergency responders from other states and the White House, and there was obviously no way that I was going to pass that up, no matter the risk. Which leads me to another big piece of advice. Go where the energy is. When I was working at Skadden in 2010 to 2012, I sort of luckily fell into the renewable energy space. There was a lot of energy, no pun intended, around developing wind and solar during Obama's first term. That's where the money was going. In June 2020, it was the COVID response team that had all the energy, all the funding. We got to innovate like no one's business, building technology systems and people systems and management systems and connecting people and information in this lightning-fast manner that you hardly ever get to do in government and policy. It's a risk that's worth taking. If you can rise above and be useful during an emergency, people are going to take notice. And even when the emergency is over, hopefully in part due to your excellent work, you will not have nothing to do. So during the pandemic, when a lot of my friends and family were taking some time off, we're doing the occasional video call with work and learning to knit and learning Italian and guitar and gardening and baking bread. I was working 14 to 16-hour days. I was on back-to-back video meetings from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m., luckily with a fiancé who would sneak in the 30 seconds between one meeting and the next with snacks that I could stuff in my mouth. One weird part of my job during the height of COVID was that whenever case counts went up, and everyone was especially advised to stay at home, that's when I would actually go into the office in person, the office being the State Emergency Operations Center. I was just working hard. I was helping people solve the problems that they faced, taking it one issue at a time, and practicing extreme prioritization. Whether that was connecting the deployer of emergency responders to the correct person in the state who dealt with respite for persons experiencing homelessness, or facilitating a meeting for the governor's staff to make sure we covered all the topics that were relevant that day and got all the approvals that we needed for that particular moment. Every day I was looking around, finding what needed to be done and figuring out how to do it. I had to be fearless about asking questions in groups, never assuming that someone in the room already had it covered, no matter how common sense it may have seemed. Remember, everyone is faking it till they make it. If you notice a gap, there's a good chance that it is, in fact, a gap and needs to be filled. At some point during the pandemic, I became the chief of staff to the incident commander, and I've now worked with a lot of chiefs in that capacity. I work with leadership to prioritize, communicate, and make things go. Chiefs of staff liaise, connect strategy to resources, and articulate vision. Okay, here's what a chief of staff does. 1, we are professional sounding boards. First for the principal, the president, the governor, the commander. They need someone trusted to bounce their ideas off of before they take them to wider audiences. We are here to help refine and, if necessary, challenge their strategies and ideas. We're also a sounding board / gatekeeper between everyone else and the principal. You run your ideas and priorities past us before we take them to the principal or leadership team to make sure everyone's time is used in the most efficient manner. For example, I spend a lot of time saying, don't present it to him like that. It's a good idea, but say it this way instead, and include these numbers, and leave this whole part out. 2, we are a professional organizer and nudger. We make sure that the trains all run on time. We are irritating as hell if your train is not cooperating, and we'll do everything in our power to get your train back on track and on time before we have to take it to the principal, because then we know no one will be happy. And 3, we're facilitators and storytellers. We help conversations happen in the best way possible. We know the people involved and who should be talking to whom. This is something, by the way, that most people think can only be built over a lot of time with a team or organization. Not true. There are plenty of people who've been around a long time but don't know who the right people are, because it's not their job. It's about using your time to learn the people as a chief of staff. We figure out what the story is and break it down to its most understandable parts for everyone involved. We find where the problem is and then work with the right people to resource and solve that particular problem. Part of my job as chief of staff during the pandemic involved something vaguely absurd now that I'm looking back on it. We had a lot of National Guard deployed to the COVID emergency, and as chief of staff to the incident commander, I was actually helping to guide and direct military activities as a civilian. I got ma'amed a lot, which was very weird, but the important thing that I learned very quickly is that to work with military-minded folks requires quick thinking about overall strategy. There are, of course, all kinds of people who go into those careers, but to generalize, military folks are doers who want snappy instruction. You have to point them in a direction, head them down a path, and then they will run with it. This is how I ended up at the front of an ops room with a bunch of people in camo watching as I showed a video that I had taken recording an ad from my Instagram feed of an accordion suitcase. You've seen those, right? It's like a closet with like a suitcase inside of it. It's for busy people on the go. It expands into a hanging closet, and then you close it down and it fits into a suitcase. This was my presentation to the team for what our demobilization, remobilization plans for COVID should look like, what we needed to do to close down some of our operations towards the end of their deployment. It needed to be done in such a way that we could stand it back up if and when there was a case surge or another pandemic, so that no one would ever have to reinvent the wheel and go through what we had had to go through for the past year plus to figure out how to respond to an unprecedented crisis. Of course, it wasn't until I was showing the video that I realized there were lots of images of bras and underwear in the ad, and I was standing up in front of a room of 50 men and women in uniform who called me ma'am or Chief Barba and were just generally very proper and official. But the point is that this visual did in fact help to get a large team all marching forward in the same direction and with the same goal. And it has spawned a new term across the state to describe this kind of need, the accordion suitcase plan. As in, we're gonna accordion suitcase it. Put it away in such a way that it can be popped open and ready again at a moment's notice. You never know what's going to get through to people. A simple explanation or visualization can mean the difference between disorganized and organized chaos. Simplifying things for people who are either down in the weeds or, alternatively, up in the sky all day long is a crucial skill that generalists have. Okay, here's a side tip about written communication. I'm just going to throw it in here because it's actually one of the best things I can tell you about working anywhere. If you're writing an email or a memo to a big, busy boss, always ask yourself this: if I had 1 minute with her, and I'm lucky enough to get the question from her, what do you need from me? Your answer to that is the top log line, the first sentence of your email or memo. Also, be ready always with a very short and direct answer to that question if you get to be in meetings with the big boss. Okay, some final thoughts here. Work hard, full stop, very simple. Value your time for sure, and certainly always keep an eye out for when you can work smarter on something, but if you're going where the energy is, where the need is, and trying to solve some big or especially complicated or unprecedented problems, know where the shortcuts are and where they just aren't. And remember that you're smart Carls, and if you're applying yourself and working hard, you're going to be the right person to be there. Regarding imposter syndrome, remember that no one really knows what's going on, except when some do, like the Marty Kleppers and the Tom Perez's of the world. Find those people, find out how to recognize them, and follow them. Make them your mentors. When you're deciding what's next, talk to those people. Talk to interesting people. Relationships are everything. I've jumped around a lot in my career, as will you all. Each generation is going to have more and more different jobs. It's no longer a world where you stay at a company for 30 years and get a gold watch, and that's exciting. Go ahead and be restless, but do it with focus. It's okay if you have some short-term jobs on your resume. Just be able to tell the story about it. Don't let yourself stagnate. Nothing ever stays the same. It'll either get better or worse. My choir director used to say this, and I would say it to my fellow nightingales in exit. We'd practice a song, and we'd get it to a great place, but it'd be a week out from the concert. And sometimes we'd want to think, well, that one's a wrap, we've got it down, it's gonna be great. If you don't keep practicing it at that level, though, give it a week and it is not going to be as good. You consistently improve something, or it gets worse, it doesn't stay the same. I got to hear Stacey Abrams speak recently, and what she said about our two-party political system resonates with me as a larger life lesson. She said, and I'm paraphrasing here, here's the thing about our current political system, and my problem with non-voters. It's like we're all at a bus stop, and there's one bus that's going to take us in one direction, and one that's going to take us the other direction. And whichever bus you vote for, we all have to get on one bus and go the way that it's going. There's no option for staying at the stop. There's no option for getting on a bus that's going somewhere else. So you gotta pick a bus. And that's just as true in life. If you're going to get anywhere at all, you have to pick a bus to get on, even if that means changing to a different one further down the line. Tom Perez had us do an exercise that I'm going to give you now as homework, and that is to write your own obituary. It seems a bit dark, yes, but there's nothing that will bring you more clarity about your desired path and values than thinking about what you would like your obituary to read. Write it, then think about whether the ways you're currently spending your time will lead to the kind of life that you want to lead. Do this exercise periodically, and watch how the story, both about how you've gotten to where you are and where you want to go, changes. And I guarantee you, you will make your difference to the human race. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you for your presentation, your observations, your experiences, and your advice, your life advice. Appreciate it very much. We will open it up to questions, answers, and of course, comments in just a moment, but I have to make my shameless plug for the Convocation, post-Convocation luncheon at this time, because we have a special speaker, we have a very special luncheon as well. That's going to be in Great Hall this time, so if you're signed up, we're going to be in the Great Hall right after Convocation, because we're going to have a musical guest artist, Jonathan Alarcon from Honduras, will be playing the drums, giving a presentation on the, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, Garifuna drumming, Garifuna music, and he's going to be accompanied by Dean McGraw, actually a local guitarist from St. Paul. So, here's the thing. We usually need an RSVP, and thank you for all of you who have. However, because we're planning on a lot of people, and I believe it's delicious chicken parm, also chickpea patties and salad and other deliciously flavored foods, please come, because we have room at the table. So again, please come if you're able to make it. Bring your friends, text your friends. We'll see you at the Great Hall. But now, questions and comments for Alex. Oh, we got one right here. Give me a minute.
Hi, Alex. Ooh, wow. Thank you. First, I just want to say thank you for this whole thing was absolutely great. It was really beautiful to my ears. So I have a question. I have some poli-sci majors, and I've been giving them some advice similar to what you have said, but I'm curious to know, what was your process like? You know how you say yes to everything, be open to everything. Other than, I know you mentioned go where the energy is there something else that would really trigger or make you say yes to something? Because I fear that if I tell them to say yes to everything and then they go for something and it's not the best experience, that it may traumatize them and not make them want to do that again. So I just want to help give them a little bit like better direction on what to say to, how to say to, and when to say yes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was a lot, sorry.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of opportunities to be traumatized when you're going into the political world. But I would say, besides, going where the energy is, because you're so unlikely to run into people who are not as excited as you. If it's something, obviously President Barack Obama's campaign was an easy yes, but there's always just kind of figuring out what is in the global subconscious at the moment, right? Like, what is going on in social media for the world of policy and politics. If you go with what's being talked about at the time, and you know, in 2012 there was a lot of talk about renewable energy, and then you know, obviously COVID. But I think as far as trauma with avoiding the toxic environments and being able to identify them, I think is a big part of what I would say about that, because there are challenging environments and there are toxic environments, and it is very, very different. And if you are going into work every day and feeling like you're worried that someone's going to come at you, you're just feeling negative about going into the office all the time, or I guess we don't really do that anymore. If you're feeling negative about talking to your coworkers, about going to meetings, then that's something to identify, and I think you get out of that situation. But difficult people where it's just hard, they're just hard, you know, it's like hard to please, that's different. So I think that's really, take the time to reflect and think about, am I really just, is this person just kind of driving me really hard and pushing me to my limits, and but I'm still learning and I'm achieving, then stick with it. But if you're not, then find the next thing. I will say also though, try to find the next thing before you leave, because that does make it a lot easier. Does that a bit answer? Okay, good.
Hi, where is the energy right now and what are you excited about? And if that's too big of a question, specifically within public health and emergency management.
Yeah, it is a tough time. I mean, the energy is still definitely in public health and emergency management, at least what I'm seeing in state government, because as it turns out, coming out of a global pandemic is even harder than scaling up during a global pandemic, because there's all these emergency dollars, right, in government and policy. You need the funding to be able to do stuff. So we had a lot of money at the beginning of COVID, and we were able to scale up and hire all of these people, and now we're like trying to figure out, okay, how do we go forward? Because historically, especially public health, but public health and emergency response has been very underfunded. So how do we not go back to that, but we can't stay at this heightened COVID response level? How do we find that middle ground and scale back in a way that is going to make us sustainable going forward? So there's certainly still a lot of energy in that if you're interested in that area. And public health in general obviously has just blown up. I mean, who knew what an epidemiologist was? Probably a lot of you did, but most people didn't know what an epidemiologist was prior to COVID, and now everyone does. But it's a really hot button now. Public health, you know, with the anti-vax movement was already pretty political in certain circles, but that's really expanded a lot now. So if you're interested in the policy and politics angle and sort of political communications and campaigning, that's going to continue to be a really high energy area of how do we continue to communicate about public health, and how do we depoliticize it in such a way that we can continue to help people to make the best choices, make the best policy choices, without letting it become such an out of control political topic that we can't even get through to people. That's the area that I've been working in, so that's the area I know about. I think in general, always campaigns, I would say, to both of your questions, always work on campaigns, because as a young person, that's the best experience you can get with all of these things, seeing how people react to things, figuring out how to communicate, figuring out how to teach other people how to communicate. And you hear about all the issues when you're in a campaign, right? It's everything that people are talking about, from the very policy heavy and serious to the very silly. So, which is always good to understand.
Do you have any advice on how to connect with others and communicate effectively for those of us who tend to struggle to communicate, and just talk to people?
Yeah. I am actually a pretty introverted person. One of the things that I would also say that I did in grad school better than I did here at Carleton was forcing myself to speak up in the classroom, because that really, it gets the juices flowing, right? You get to build a rapport with your professors and with your fellow students, and it gets more conversations going when you can sort of speak up. And sometimes you have to force yourself when you're more introverted. I think when I started reaching out to people doing like cold calls, luckily we had already sort of gone from cold calls to cold emails by the time I was doing that. And cold emails are great. Like it is easy because you can sit there, you can think through what you want to say to the person, you can research their background, and then you can craft, a sort of to the point email that just says, hey, I'm really interested in what you're doing. I would love to hear about it. I think posing that in that sort of way makes it a lot easier, an informal way to connect with people on that level. And again, the worst that can happen is they just never write back to you, right? I mean, I've never gotten an email back on a cold email. Even like I sent them to the governor's chief of staff before I worked for her. Like, you can just put it out there, and I've never gotten back like, how dare you contact me, right? So I think the worst that can happen is you get no reply. And then you've pushed yourself to that, and you put it out there in the universe, and when they write back, so often, I mean, the people that write back are going to be open to talking to you, and you go have coffee, and you just, I mean, if you're really nervous, you have a list of questions about their experience. People love talking about themselves. I just did it for 40 minutes, so. Like, we want to tell you what we've done and help you in any way that we can. People that write back to those emails, that's what they want to do. So I would just really encourage you, like, once you put the email out there, then you're like, well, I did it. It's just like pressing send is the hardest part, I feel like. And then from there, then you have to like set a date, and then you show up to the coffee, and then it'll just go from there. Hope that was helpful.
Hi, what do you enjoy most about working with people, whether it be in like small groups or organizing a community, like when you worked with elections? Or, yeah.
I think I love working with words. Like that's always like my first love is like I'm more of a writer than a go out into the community and like ad-lib person. And so I think the fact that I still get energy from going out and meeting groups of people, to me says that most people can enjoy that. The connecting with people who are passionate about things. If you're working on a campaign and you're going out into a community, the people that are showing up are going to be really passionate about it, and whether they agree with you or not, navigating how to get through that the first few times you do it, it's really hard and it's really awkward, and you have to figure out how, when someone is directly sort of challenging you in a group, how you are going to deal with that. It's really just making everyone feel heard. I think saying, yes, I hear you, and trying to push the conversation for everyone continuously in a more constructive way that everyone's gonna feel like they are part of the conversation. Of course, there are those really people that just want to yell at you. There's always gonna be like super negative people. That's not my favorite part. That one you just want to say like, yes, I would love to talk to you about that after this. Like, find me after. We'll talk about it one-on-one. But I think just hearing passionate people speak about what is important to them, because you can learn so much from, you think you know everything about an issue. Like, you think you've learned everything on the book learning, and you've talked to a lot of people, and you've talked to the elected officials. But when you go out into a community and continue to hear, you'll hear different facets of it. And hearing those individual stories is what's so interesting to me. That's why I always loved books and English, is like, but how is it different for you as opposed to the larger we, right? And then being able to reconcile those things and figure out a policy that is going to be best for the best for the greatest good, but also having the picture of seeing all of those individual experiences woven into there. Yeah.
Hi, first off, that was a great talk. Yes, it was very good. Second, you kind of just touched on this, but what would you say has been the biggest lesson you've learned from working on campaigns?
Biggest lesson. Wow, there's so many. I think it is pretty much that of you have to be able to reconcile the individual needs with the needs of the group, right? And thinking through, how do I connect with this person? Because campaigns are all about reaching the individual voter and getting out every single vote, but also you can't tailor your policies, and the candidate can't tailor their policies or tailor their opinions or goals to every single individual person. So as a campaign staffer, how do you continue to carry that message of the candidates, but also you're the one who's on the ground and hearing those individual voices. So really figuring out how to reconcile that, and be a good messenger for whoever the principal is, while still hearing everyone's concerns on the ground. That was the greatest challenge, and probably the best thing that I took away from my campaign experience. And you have to tailor your messages, right? You have to talk about things in a different way with a moderate voter than you would with a far left voter, and but you can still communicate those same ideas and say, this is why this is important for you, this is why this is important for you.
Hello.
Hi.
So you work in politics, and although there are probably some very honest people in politics, there are also some very dishonest fraud people that you don't want to deal with. So if you have to work with those people, or work against or for those people, how do you deal with that? How do you navigate people who are dishonest?
Yeah. I never had to work for people who are dishonest. I think that might be one of those toxic environments that I would say, yes, say no, run away. But in politics, I mean, you really have to believe in your candidate. You have to believe in your message. I think there are, at least for me, I know there are some cynical people who will, like, in communications firms and things, who may be working for people that they don't necessarily believe in, but generally as a campaign staffer, you really believe in your person, you really believe in your message. When you're working against people who just lie, it's best just to call it out, I think, and younger generations continue to appreciate this ever more, as if you just say, that's just not right. That's just not correct. Here are the facts. And there will always be people who just don't care that you have the facts and will not listen to you anyway. You're not trying to get those people. I had a lot of, especially in my area of Colorado in 2008, it was a very red area, and I had to train my volunteers who I was sending out over and over. Once you realize if someone believes the birther stuff, you're done. Just say thank you for your time and leave, because you're never going to get that person. You're never going to change their mind, and that's truer and truer, obviously now than it was then. But you identify the people who you can sway, right? The people are like, I'm just not sure. Then you can bring the facts and say, here's what I know. Here's what the truth is, and this person said this is not correct. Can I talk to you more about this, or can I give you more information about it, or here are some resources that I can share with you. And it's just identifying that sort of center section of people that you can convince. But in general, yeah, when dealing with people that are just not above board, you just call them out and hope that the people that are convincible are hearing you.
Hi, my name is Victoria, and I really appreciate you coming to talk today. So I think I was taught by my parents or other mentors to go straight through school. So can you talk more about the benefits of taking that break? Because I plan on going to law school, and I thought I would do it immediately after college, but talked about something different, so I just want to hear that.
Not to discourage you. I mean, if that's something that, if you are like, I want to be a lawyer, and I've talked to lawyers, like I would say talk to lawyers from different areas, right? Because lawyers do all kinds of things. There's not just the corporate lawyers who work at the law firm. However, I will say a lot of people end up in that, at least for like 3 to 5 years after they graduate from law school, because you have to pay off those student loans. But I think just talking to people that are in it, you can talk to people who are in, if you want to be in the politics and policy world eventually, talk to people who went to law school who are in that world. But I will say, especially look for people that are closer to your age, right? Because law school for a long time was sort of just the thing that then also was your entry into policy and politics, and it's not as much that way anymore. You can do a master's, you can do a master's in business, you can do a master's in policy administration affairs, and that might be more what you're looking for. It really depends on the kind of things that you want to learn, and then what jobs you want to have. I think. I was really glad that I worked at a law firm before I went to law school, because I realized I don't want to do these things that they're doing. And you want to realize that before you're like in law school and paying all that money, right? But I think, and I also taking that time, because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Like I just knew I didn't want to do that. Once I'd experienced it, I was like, I don't really want to do what they're doing, but I'm not sure what I want to do. So then I took more time before I eventually went to grad school. So I think the more clear you can be and the more people you can talk to from those areas that you're looking to get into before you make that decision is best. But it's different for everybody. I always say you want to get a few years of work under your belt, because the work world is so different from the college world, and seeing how things work and getting more of those different experiences. I mean, you could end up working on a campaign, and for me, I loved it and it was a great experience, but I also knew I didn't want to be a campaigner for life. Some people go into campaigns, they're like, this is amazing, I want to do this forever. So it's just you learn more and more as you go on. That's what I recommend.
And on that note, we've reached the time we have to say once again, thank you very much, Alex. Thank you all for being here, and that concludes our convocation for today.
Thank you so much, you guys. Good to see you all.